Good afternoon and welcome to K2's Road to Excellence with Excel Series Part 7 and our good partner Adagio. This is Alan Salmon and I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar. We're a couple of days away from spring here in Brampton, Ontario. Woke up to snow this morning, which disturbed my wonderful wife, but I gave her some history. On May the 3rd, 1953, when my family and I returned from 3 years in Chile, it snowed. So let's get on with it. A couple of things as usual before we get started. I'll be teaching today in Excel 2016, not a problem for any of you on 2013, 10, and 7. Your microphones are muted. And in terms of notes, when you get the package within 10 days, you will be getting a recording, my extensive teaching notes, teaching files, and so on. So if you want to take notes, feel free to do so, but I cover that in my handout. In terms of questions, ask them anytime through the chat window. They will not be answered during this session. There just isn't time, but you will all receive all of the questions and all of the answers. My good friend Marilyn Benninger is backing me up as usual today, and she's your go-to person for any technical issues. So, the name of the game today starts with the letter S, standing for security. And that is a timely topic in light of the news. So, Marilyn, we need to do a post on security. Will you please put it up?
Good morning, everyone. The way that you secure your verified CPE with us is to answer 75% of the polling questions, of which there will be 5 today. So we're going to ask you the first one, which you should see a blue screen. What security, if any, do you apply to your Excel files? We cut our poll off when we achieve 85 to 90% results. So if you could select either none, password protecting, preventing data entry, or preventing changes, we'll get back to the presentation. So we're just about 90%. I'm going to count you down from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm closing the poll. And I'm going to share those results now. Alan, can you see them?
Well, that's interesting. I hope to change the minds of the 42%, and I will be introducing you to the final 2 during this session. So let's get on with things, and I'm going to call up my first Excel file that I want to share with you. There's nothing magic about it. I picked a budget. I'm not going to do anything with it, but I'm going to deal with some issues of security. So I'm going to go to the File menu at the top of the screen. That's the left-hand button if you're on 2007, and click. I'm going to go all the way down to Options, and I get this screen. I'm going to go down to the Trust Center, and the only thing I'm going to do on this screen is click on Trust Center Settings, because I'm going to cover what you'd get if you click there. So when I click on Trust Center Settings, I get a whole bunch of things that I could do from a security point of view. So very quickly, let's deal with Trusted Publisher, and you'll notice I don't have anything here. So who might a trusted publisher will be? Well, the obvious ones are Microsoft, Adobe, SoftTrack, Excel, Sage, QuickBooks, and so on. But if I get files from them, I don't need to mark them as trusted publishers. I know they're trusted. When it comes to trusted locations, what you're looking at here are the default settings, and you should all have these settings. And that's basically saying that I trust any file that is in my template folder, in my Excel start folder, or my startup or library folders. And since I personally put them there, it shouldn't be an issue. Trusted documents. I don't have a network, but I suggest that those of you that do should allow documents on the network to be trusted because those are your internal documents. And when it comes to trusted documents, I'm going to bounce out to my email. And I got this email last week from one of my responders, and she may be on the line today, but I'm not going to identify her. And basically what she wants to do is look up some values. Now, in the email, and I haven't showed you all of it, at the very start, she indicated who she was, that she attended some of my webinars, et cetera, So I had a pretty good idea that she could be trusted. So I opened up the spreadsheet and look at the message I get when it opens up. Oops, I got to get out of here before it'll open. There we go. Notice the yellow band at the top. Any attachment that I get over the internet by my settings, and I'll show you where they are in a bit, will enable that yellow band. Now, if that individual had just sent me the file and said, Alan, please look at this, I would have handled it very differently. Depending on the mood I was in, I might have moved it to junk. If I was in a good mood, I would have hit reply. Why are you sending me this email, an attachment, and not even put a signature in and send it to her? And when I do that 99% of the time, I don't ever get a reply. So in this case, I am going to enable the editing. And I'm going to blow it away, and we're going to go back to the Trust Center. Here we go. So add-in catalogs, I've never played with any of those. I don't think it's relevant for you and I. Dealing with security and add-ins, the choices here require application to be signed by a trusted publisher, disable them. The only add-ins that I have are the add-ins that I add, so I know they're to be trusted. ActiveX settings. In advanced Excel work, you can create buttons, checkboxes, boxes, scrollable boxes, combo boxes, and so on. And those are built using what are called ActiveX controls. So notice what I've checked here. Prompt me before enabling all controls with minimum restrictions. The others are either dangerous or not relevant. And what that means is that if I open up one of my spreadsheets or one of Ward's that do have checkboxes in it, I'm going to get that yellow bar just like I got with the previous one. So my recommendation is prompt me before entering controls. Macro settings I will come back to in about 2 minutes. And protected view I will deal with later on. And the same thing with the message bar. When it comes to external content, I suspect that all of you do that. You have a workbook, and in a worksheet, you have a formula or a formula that says, go and get this cell from another workbook. And you're probably aware, and you've seen the message that pops up. Do you want to reconnect the links? That's not the right word for it, but you get the message or not. And notice the prompt that I have here. Prompt user about data connections. That will immediately, as I open the workbook, give me the chance to say, yep, refresh or don't. File block settings, you're going to laugh when you see this. Notice that I have check marks from Excel 97 to Excel 2. And what that means is if somebody sends me a workbook in that format, I'm going to get warned. And you're probably all laughing to yourself, get a life, Alan. I was working in Excel 2 back in 1991. Well, as many of you know, I just finished an extensive survey on the technology that people use, and guess what? 5 respondents indicated that they were using Lotus 123. End of sermon. So that we go there. And that completes what I want to do in that. I'll come back to it once more a little later on. So now I want to deal with the world of macros. And my example is this one. And the format is not important. I'm not going to run the macro. I want to call your attention to the file name 02 workbook with a macro .xlsm, which means it's saved as a macro workbook. How did I do that? Well, I went back to options. I went to the Trust Center settings, and I went to macro settings. And notice the 4. Disable all macros without notification, with notification, except digitally signed. And then the very dangerous one, enable all macros not recommended. So what happens when I have a file that's macro enabled? Well, just give me a second here while I call it up. Here we go. So I'm opening up a file that has a macro in it. There's your security warning. Macros may have been disabled. Now, I want that if I had no idea where the file's coming from, but since usually I do, I just enable content and my macros will work fine. Let's change our work for a second, well, for a few minutes, and let's deal with this situation. And 47% of you said that you are doing this at certain points with certain workbooks, and that is that you are applying a password. To do that, we need to go backstage. And backstage is what Microsoft calls this area to the right when I click on the file. Let's deal with Protect Workbook. Let's deal with Encrypt with Password. And it's asking for a password. And I don't do this in the real world, but guess what? My password is password. And you've all done this many times. And of course, below that, you get the caution that you better remember the password. Now, up until Excel 2007, there were tools out there that cracked passwords. And the way they did it is on high-speed machines. They just kept using different flavors of passwords. They could usually crack it. With 2007 and through to now, Microsoft changed their security and they went to 156 encryption. And I think it can be cracked if you had a supercomputer, but for all us normal human beings, it can't be cracked. So let's take a look at a file that is password protected. There we go. Put in the password. and I'm in. And lastly, it begs the question, how do I change a password or get rid of a password in Excel? And by the way, all of the settings that I've shown you so far are also true in Word and PowerPoint. So again, I go Backstage, I go to Protect Workbook, and notice it's flagged now. Protect Workbook, encrypt with password, delete that, save it, and now it's open, and you notice it's changed. A little bit of a caveat on that, to be able to do what I just did, I have to be able to open the workbook, so I have to know the password to get in, and then I change it and delete it. Next piece that I want to review with you is this. And again, it's my standard file. But you notice that I have some cells in pink. And those cells are the cells that I want people to be able to enter data in. So I'm going to select them, not including the formula. And then I'm going to change my settings. It's a two-step process so that nobody will be able to enter data in any of the white cells, but they will be able to in the pink cells. The first step is to go up to the Home tab, over to Format, click on Format Cells at the bottom, and I get this window here, and I want to go all the way over to the right and click on Protection. And its checkbox is locked, so I'm going to unlock it. And what that is telling Microsoft is, in those pink cells, allow me to enter data when I lock all of the other cells. So there's step one. Step two is pretty easy. I'm going to go Backstage, I'm going to go to Protect Workbook, and I'm going to go to Protect the Current Sheet. Now, I could macro enable it to protect me from any other people entering it. I won't on this one. And then I have some checkboxes here. Select lock cells, unlock cells, format cell, da-da-da-da-da. Notice that I've checked select lock cells and select unlock cells, and I'll explain why I've done this in a bit. Back to the Backstage, and notice one or more sheets in this workbook has been locked. So what's the implications of that? Well, I can select any of these cells, but if I try to change it, watch what happens. This cell or chart you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. To make a change, you might be requested to enter a password. Okay, let's go here. Bingo. Notice what I can do. Now, I'm sure that many, if not all of you, are wondering, why would I let somebody select a cell if they can't make a change? Well, let's go down here to a formula. And the reason for that, it may be useful for someone who's working on this file to look at and try to understand Alan's brilliant formulas. And no, I'm not going to explain it. So when I protect a worksheet, I always allow me or anybody else to view it, but not make any changes. Second, you have to do this for every single sheet in a workbook. It is not global. And thirdly, how do we get it off? Well, if it's not password protected, I merely go here, Protect Workbook, Protect current sheet, click, and it's gone. Now here's the next thing that I can do with a workbook, and that is this. I go to Backstage, and I go down here to protect the workbook structure, and the key there is workbook. When I click on it, I get this, and once again, I can password protect. What do I want to protect? The structure, but not the windows, and I'll explain why in a minute. And then I click on OK, and nothing's happened. But watch what happens when I right mouse click on any tab. Can you see in the window that insert, delete, rename, move, tab color, hide, unhide are grayed out? That defines the fact that nobody now can insert a row, delete a row, insert a worksheet, and so on. And that's what we mean by the structure. Now, what about the windows? If I turn that on, that locks the window that I'm in, and I don't want that. So when do I want to use password protection? Well, obvious with sensitive data. When do I want to use worksheet protection? To protect me or a client from screwing up my data and restricting their access to certain cells. So when do I protect the worksheet structure? I will do it when I want to prevent me from accidentally deleting things like sheet tabs, rows, etc. I will certainly do it when I'm creating this file for a client and I don't want them to screw up the structure. So now let's go and look at this file. And again, notice on this file that I have a couple of comments. If we go back to the Backstage and click on Check for Issues, I'm not sure you're aware of this, but Excel or Microsoft does certain things when you create a workbook. First of all, it embeds who it was, when it was, and the time it was created. So when would I go to inspect the workbook? Well, it's a quick way to see any comments, headers or footers, hidden worksheets, and so on. If I click here, inspect the document, and I can inspect it for comments, properties, data model, and so on. The only thing that I have in here are the comments. So when I click on inspect, notice the following items were found and some comments. So I'm going to remove them. And then I'm going to close the file. And you're going to notice they're gone. So why would I go Backstage to remove comments? Well, because that's a global setting. If I want to remove all of the comments, normally I've got to go and delete them individually. And I don't go Backstage to there very often because I'm not interested in the data. I know what data is being collected on me. So that puts that to bed. The final thing I want to do with you today is this. I want to go to marking a document as final. And you have all seen this. And marking a document final is just the old way of saying making it read-only. So I'm going to cut out of here and show you how to do that. It's very simple. We need to go back to the Backstage, protect the workbook, and mark it as final. Mark would be marked as final and then saved. And then a warning. And there we go. Now, let's understand there is no security with marked document as final. So what I'm saying here is that I think I'm done with this file. And I send it to Marilyn. She opens it and she sees this and she explores the workbook and said, he forgot this, forgot that. She is my great editor. So all she does is edit anyhow, and she corrects my screw-ups. So what is the point then of marking a document as final? In my case, it reminds me that I thought I was done. In Marilyn's case, I'm telling her I think I'm done, but go ahead and do things. So finally, I want to go here and go to the share command here. And I can share Excel documents in a bunch of ways. I can share it with people, I can share it with email, send it as an Adobe, present online, and send by instant message. Let's deal with save to the cloud. Two-step process. I've got to save the Excel document to someplace on the cloud, and for me that's either OneDrive or SharePoint. And then once I do that, then I can share it with somebody. And you've all seen this. Send email. Now, again, I've got choices, and we very rarely use any of the other choices. Typically, we're sending it as an attachment. But if I click on Save as Adobe PDF, it's going to turn it into an Adobe file, and it's going to be in my email. Send as an XPS. XPS is Microsoft's attempt to tackle Adobe with a file setting, and they've gone nowhere with it. Send it as an internet fax. That's a laugh. I haven't even sent a fax on my real fax machine in over a year. Send it Adobe PDF for shared commentary. What that does is turns it into a PDF and allows it to be shareable, meaning when I send it to Marilyn, she can fill in comments or change it. Present online, that's an interesting concept. If I'm in a Skype meeting with video, or as it's now called, a team meeting, I can actually call up an Excel spreadsheet within the team meeting. And you're going to laugh at this one, send by instant message. Why are you going to laugh? Well, because who would ever think of sending an attachment with an instant message? Well, I happen to be looking at some numbers here, and of the 2,535 respondents to the survey, 1.3 use IM to communicate with their clients. Now, before I close and we do the last poll, I want to make this comment, and that is dealing with the security of email. And I have 5 interesting statistics to run by you. In the survey, we asked people how they communicated with their clients with their tax returns. 22% email, 20% face-to-face meetings, 2.4% on a web portal, 2.4% on social networks. Understand the implications of that. That means that well over 80% of accountants and bookkeepers are sharing tax information unsecured. Now, how do you deal with that? One, of course, is to have a web portal. One is to use secure email, and 6.4% of the respondents did. And for that, I highly recommend eCourier. And that ends the lesson. So Marilyn, can we have the last poll, please?
Definitely, Alan. So folks, we're launching our second poll here. Given all the great tips and tricks that Alan has presented today, have you changed your mind about Excel security, and will you now use it more frequently in your Excel documents? It's a nice, easy yes, no, or maybe. We're already at 90%, so I'll be counting you down from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm now closing the poll. There you go, Alan.
Well, I think I've done my job, so I think I'm entitled to 30 minutes of rest. So why don't you hand it off to my good friend, Andrew Bates?
With pleasure. I'm making you the presenter now, Andrew.
Awesome. It's not really taking over the captain's chair, but I'll just drive for a little bit. It's a pleasure talking to you all today. I thank you for spending, for me, a morning. I know that Alan said good afternoon to everyone, but here on the wet coast, it's a very wet day and gray. And I will say, though, no snow outside the office. I have daffodils in bloom. Today, I thought we'd talk about electronic document storage because it's becoming a hotter and hotter issue as people begin to think about that and get more documents electronically. More people are sending invoices by PDF. There's unrelenting pressure from your credit card holder and electricity provider to accept your invoices and statements in electronic form. And in the accounting department, there's just an enormous amount of space dedicated to paper, whether it's partly because that's the way it's always been done, partly because of the audit requirement that CRA maintains that they have to be able to look at the documents. And we've been working on electronic documents at SoftTrack really for the better part of 4 years, which sounds like a long time, but we wanted to make sure that we properly covered all the things about paper in the accounting department. So I'm going to show you around a little bit, and we may have time at the end of the presentation for some questions. So before we get started, just to let you know what Adagio is, it's perhaps the logical progression from Sage 50 or QuickBooks, entry-level ERP. We're batch-based, multi-user, multi-currency, modular. So every time you ask whether there's whether Adagio can do something, I'll tell you that we have a module for that. On the other hand, it means that if you're a not-for-profit just trying to manage a general ledger and accounts payable with complex financial reporting needs, you just have to buy a GL and accounts payable and record the funding from your government agency as a simple journal entry. So you can tailor the product to the functionality that you specifically require within your organization. While some percentage of Adagio sites have only one person in Adagio, the majority of our sites have 2 or 3 people in Adagio concurrently. As I mentioned, we're multi-user. The 2 or 3 people are typically a CFO or a controller working in the general ledger and bank reconciliation, and then an AP clerk and an AR clerk, perhaps. I'll just be clear, we don't consider salespeople who are working in the accounting software as in the accounting department. And we also have written Adagio very specifically for the accounting department. We're very focused on functionality that's of interest to the accounting department and people in the accounting department. We actually refer to things as debits and credits. We expose the debits and credits of a transaction without you having to drill down. We want you to be able to feel like that all that accounting training is being put to good use. Unlike the entry-level products, it's possible to post a transaction to a fiscal period other than the date of the transaction if that's what's required, because, of course, GAAP requires that revenue and expense be matched to the periods where they're applicable. So let's talk a little bit about the filing cabinet. A bit of a love-hate relationship in the accounting department. The accounting department is always being called upon to go and look at, find some old documents or look up where things came from. There's all the various There's all the various reports that come out of the accounting department. There's invoices that come in that have to be paid, have to be approved, and then have to be paid. So often there's a lot of space devoted to the filing of those documents. And at least you can, if it's well organized, if the documents are well organized, then you can go and put your hands on the documents in question. So let's talk a little bit about what we were thinking about when we were working on the document storage. Because one of the things that we did, that I'll show a little bit later in the presentation, is first of all we concentrated on all the paper that was being generated by the accounting software, all the reports, all the invoices and credit notes and order confirmations and stuff like that, and we automatically generate and file those for you. But we had this problem of the transactions that are coming in from external organizations, like invoices. And those invoices have to be sent off for approval, and then they have to come back into the accounting department and they have to be paid. And those represent a little bit more of a challenge because in the survey of our users, the very first thing that they would do with a PDF attached to an email requesting payment would be to print out the PDF. So accounting transactions are coming in electronically, they're being converted to paper, they're circulating around the organization, and then they're coming back to the accounting department. So what we really wanted was we wanted to be able to quickly answer questions that come up when you're looking at probably the final resting place of all the debits and credits. You're looking at a financial statement and you have a question about a number on the financial statement. So I've moved us into the financial reporter in Adagio. It's a full spreadsheet. You can do all the computations that you would do generally in Excel. It has almost all of its formatting. It is a full spreadsheet. So, but because it's a financial reporter, you can point at a number and you can double click on the number and see all the accounts and departments that were summed to get to that number on the financial statement. And then you can double click on a particular number and see what's being posted throughout the year, throughout the fiscal periods. And then you can double click on a particular amount and see all the individual invoices and the amounts that they represented. And then you can double click on a particular entry and see the balanced journal entry. So here's, if I scroll over to the right, I'm running a little bit lower resolution. So then I can, you'll notice one of these columns here is a document link. And if I want, I can view the transaction from which all of these expense entries came. And this might have some writing on it. How did this? So this means that the CFO or controller who has a question about an expense when looking at a financial statement can go to the source document of that expense without having to walk to a filing cabinet or intercom the accounts payable clerk or do anything. They can just double click and see the source document that generated the general ledger accounting entry. So of course we have to get to this point, and that's what I'm going to show you this morning or this afternoon, depending upon your time zone. And I'll show you how you get to that. But the important point here is that, and I'll also, of course, we know that you've been able to attach documents to transactions in other accounting solutions for a long time. But we'll talk a little bit about that because what is perhaps unique about Adagio Docstore is that you can attach as many documents as you want to a single transaction. To the extent that a document has been generated by the accounting software itself, that document will be automatically attached to the transaction with any other documents that are already there. And those documents, that packet of documents, will flow all the way through the other modules. So if they were attached in purchase orders, so a purchase order was generated, when the invoice comes in, the invoice and the purchase order will move over to accounts payable. When that's posted, you'll be able to look at both the purchase order and the receipt and the invoice. And then when you pay a check, we'll generate a remittance advice. We'll attach the invoices to the remittance advice so that if you look at the check, you can see all the invoices that it paid and all the purchase orders that authorized the invoices that were paid. And when you post that batch in the general ledger, you'll be able to see, if you're looking at the check transaction in the GL, you can look at the remittance advice and all the the invoices that it paid. And all of that happens automatically and without impacting any of the transaction posting performance within Adagio. So that's the first thing that you should know, is that you can have 150 documents attached to a transaction, and that transaction will post with the same speed as a transaction with only one document attached. You can move you can place where the documents are going to be stored. They do not have to be stored with the accounting data. They can be stored on a NAS drive or externally. And you can move the documents around without breaking any of the accounting links. So let's go back and look at this, how we get there. So I'll just close this down. I'll go back a little bit to the PowerPoint. Now, the accounting departments that we work with Adagio are not particularly early adopters. So one of the questions that I'm kind of curious about, that I'm going to start with a survey here, is within the audience here, have any of you made any move towards going paperless? So have you made any move towards storing all your documents in electronic format? And I'm kind of curious about this. I know that there's some sensitivity to CRA requirements and things like that. We'll give you a few minutes to get your votes in, and just because I'm curious about how people are making on this progress. I think for the first time now, we are beginning to see people really seriously think about moving to paperless. They're beginning to think about the advantages of PDF. So let's see, we're over 80%. So I'm going to close the poll in just a second here, and I'll share it with you because the results are quite interesting. Firstly, the fact that almost 10% of you have made everything electronic, that's interesting for me. And then 40% of you have done some reading. Well, we've done a lot of reading, and we understand that a lot of the processes within an accounting department are predicated on the movement of paper. As I joked about people printing out that PDF form, the process within the accounting department and the organization as a whole often involves the movement of paper. In fact, the interesting thing that we discovered when we were looking at external document management systems is a large percentage of them ended up completely recreating the accounting software in the document management side. If you're trying to manage AP invoices as documents and circulating them for approval, then you have to be able to detect duplicate documents. You have to know when they've been paid. You have to be able to group them together for those that have been paid on a single check. You have to know what vendors they were part of. So you have to have a vendor file. If there's a PO system in place, it gets even more complicated because there's purchase order approval levels, and then you have to know whether purchase orders have been printed, and you have to get the purchase orders. Anyway, when we were looking at external document systems, we were amazed at how many of them were duplicating enormous amounts of functionality in the accounting department, and we wanted to get rid of that. Just to talk a little bit about the differences between paper and PDF documents. You can mark up paper. That's probably one of the best things, is you can make notes on it. You can attach Post-it notes to it. You can, in fact, it's one of the things that makes my own customer service department a little bit leery of working with electronic documents. It's easy to track the originals if that's important. Although I will say that since more and more documents get circulated as electronic documents all the way through their life, then the concept of an original becomes more problematic. Probably the biggest thing is you don't need power in order to look at them. You don't need specialized technology. And the passing of paper from person to person embodies the workflow of the organization. So if I get an invoice, but it needs your approval, I can hand it to you for approval. And you can signify your approval by attaching a signature to it and handing it back to me for payment. So on the PDF side, if you're trying to deal with PDF documents, you can mark them up. Of course, you can mark them up just using Adobe Reader. You can attach signatures and things like that. They're easy to distribute. That's probably the best thing about them. Virtually free to distribute, and you can distribute as many copies as you want. You don't have to stand at the photocopier and insert them in out boxes and things like that. The best thing about them is that you can find a PDF. You can ask the computer to scan the entire filing cabinet looking for PDFs that have a particular customer number or vendor number on them, or amount or date or anything like that. So there are many different ways to come at the same document. Within a PDF, hyperlinks work, so that if you want to refer to something, you don't have to carefully type in some long URL into a web browser. You can just, from the PDF, click on the hyperlink and your browser will launch because you're looking at the document in electronic way. You can use color because it's free for all intents. Well, color is free. Virtually everyone in the accounting department has a color monitor, and PDFs are cheap, well, inexpensive. Like, people do not understand how inexpensive a PDF is compared to paper. But if a piece of paper, just the paper, not the ink or the fancy machine or the filing cabinet or anything, costs a penny a page, a PDF of that page costs 316,000 times less than that piece of paper. So PDFs are enormously less expensive to generate and to manage and to file. So PDF, people are beginning to understand the benefits that electronic documents bring to the table. So what's Docstore? Well, first of all, it's a filing cabinet for all of the PDF documents. We wanted to make sure that the filing of the documents was easy for a human to be able to understand. We have the doc storage folder where all of the PDFs are going to be stored, all of the forms, all of the invoices, all of the credit notes, invoices received from vendors, purchase orders. They're separated into customers and GL and vendors, and within each vendor, you can see that there's a separate folder for each vendor by their name with their vendor code, because Adagio uses codes. Their name and vendor code as the file folder. These are automatically created for you. If you go into a vendor's folder, you can elect to have every document in its own folder, so you can see all the invoices in one place, or all the receipts or PO receipts or purchase orders that you've raised for that vendor can be separated by folder. Or if you're a smaller volume organization, you can put all the documents in one folder for the vendor. This was specifically designed to mirror the filing cabinet in the accounting office, so that people would feel comfortable that even if the computer system got broke in some way, that they would still be able to find a document if they had to. And all of these documents are, all of these folders are completely automatically generated for you while you're using Docstore. Let's see. So a filing cabinet for all the PDF documents. The accounting reports are automatically saved as PDF, because another source of paper in the accounting department, paper that has to be filed, that has to be put away, that has to be saved for CRA, are the reports that come out. And these reports often have to be shared, whether they're GL detailed listings or trial balances or open receivables or overdue receivables or open payables, aged payables. Those reports have to be saved. Those accounting reports can automatically be saved and stored as PDFs with automatic naming, so they don't collide with each other. For every form that the accounting software generates, so that's every invoice, every credit note, every check remittance advice, every order confirmation, every PO, every inventory receipt, those documents are generated as PDFs and automatically attached to the accounting transactions that they generate. And once attached, they automatically flow through all the other modules. So a purchase order, which is generated in Adagio purchase orders, will flow through to accounts payable and will be visible on the invoice, and will flow from the invoice when it flows down to the general ledger. The person looking at the expense will be able to click on the expense, see the invoice, see the purchase order, see the receipt that recorded the receipt of goods from that purchase order. You can view and attach documents directly on the accounting transaction. So you can attach additional transactions. You can also attach documents to master files as well, so that you can attach voided check images to a vendor for EFT. You can attach check account information or authorizations for pre-authorized debits onto customers, that kind of overall. And as I mentioned before, the document flow is maintained with no performance degradation. So especially since these documents are quite static in nature, that these are not volatile files. Once a PDF is generated, it just sits around for the 7 or 8 years that the CRA asks that you maintain the documents. So they don't change. The PDFs are there forever. So let's take a look at the way that this would work. I'll go back to my general ledger. I showed you, well, perhaps the thing that we'll do is we'll go across to accounts payable, and I'll just briefly show you the way that you would attach documents. So if I'm here, I'm looking at all the vendors that I have on file in descending order by balance. Normally the list would be in vendor code sequence. If I'm looking at a vendor, when I'm looking at the vendor transactions, if I had some transactions, then I would be able to see, Easy Office has transactions. I can see the invoices attached to the transactions. Here's the invoice that we're waiting to pay. So if I was doing a manual check for banner travel, this is an example of an alert. All the invoices have to be prepaid. You may require purchase orders from a particular vendor. So you'll notice that on this form where I enter a manual check for a cash invoice, I have a little paperclip down on the lower right-hand corner. And on any form for which there is a paperclip, you can attach a document. Now, there's lots of different ways to attach documents. You can attach documents by scanning them all into a central folder and then dragging and dropping from the folder into onto the batch itself like this. I can just drag and drop, and now that document has been attached to this batch. By the way, I can attach a document to a transaction in Adagio without having entered who the vendor was or anything like that. I can just start by attaching the document by dragging it from a central place. I can drag it off an email that I have in Outlook. I can scan it from ScanSnap or Twain Compliant Scanner, many different ways to attach documents. And once they're attached, I can look at them by clicking on the spectacles. That's a little button with spectacles on it. I think I'm the only person in North America who calls them spectacles. Our QA department said, why do we have a bicycle going down the hill on this form? Someone else said, oh, I thought they were handcuffs. So it's hard sometimes to get a small button to look like those are meant to be eyeglasses. So you just click on, you can also click on the paperclip and browse around and find some transactions. You can drag and drop onto this dialog if you want. You can combine PDFs. So if you have a whole raft of PDFs and they're all separate documents and you want them combined into a single big PDF, you can do that. So we've attached our documents. Okay. I'll print and post this batch. I'll mark it ready to post and post it. Oh, first of all, I have to print the check, and I'll send it to a different printer, perhaps. I'll use the Microsoft XPS printer just to keep Microsoft happy. Here's our printed the checks. Were the checks printed properly? Yes, they were. Do you want to print additional forms? No, I don't. Do you want to clear the advice? Yes, I do. Now that check has been posted, and if I went to Banner Travel, you'd see that I now have that transaction posted over here and a check printed for it. There's my system check. I've lost my. So in here, I can see the transaction. Oh, getting ahead of myself. I do have to post the batch. And there's a posting journal. Now, remember I said that all the reports are automatically generated. This is an audit report. I can automatically generate a PDF of this report. It gets saved away for me in a reports folder, payables audit. So it's posting journal 3. I don't have to make up a filing name. If I look at my file folders, I have my documents here. Demo data, reports, payables, audit. There's my posting journal automatically filed away with the posting sequence number embedded in the name. No one has to do any filing of this. It's all there for if an auditor wants to look and see what was posted. And then when we go across to Banner Travel in the transactions list, we can see the transaction that we just posted and the check that we wrote for it and the invoice that it paid. So that's the nice thing about this is that we automatically attach the check. I was giving a seminar and for me, watching accounting departments attach copies of invoices to check stubs seems very labor intensive. And I asked whether people were doing that in the seminar, and a CFO raised their hand and said, well, it's very important because I can check for mistakes. And I asked what kind of mistakes the accounting staff were making that had to be checked for. And she said, well, they're attaching the wrong invoices to the check stub. And I thought about that for a second and said, well, if you didn't ask them to attach the invoices to the check stub, they wouldn't be able to make that mistake, which caused her to pause for a minute. And one of the interesting things of why that's a serious mistake is that if you attach the wrong invoice to the stub, the invoice is essentially lost because you can't find you can't find the document again. So I just realized how it's been such an exciting topic. I just realized I just have a couple of minutes, so I have 2 poll questions that maybe I'll just move straight to the final question, which is if I'm kind of curious to know, because people are trying to figure out how this electronic stuff works and are looking at external document management systems. And from our perspective, you really want all the document management tightly integrated with the accounting. So I have a pretty straightforward question today. And that question is, if you had completely integrated document management within the accounting, and every time you filed a document or referenced a document, you could get at it with the click of the mouse, is that sufficient to make you consider changing accounting platforms? There's a lot of resistance to changing accounting platforms. I've been in this space for 30 years. I know how resistant people are to that. The other interesting thing for me is I was chatting with someone who said that their filing method was that they would scan the document as soon as it came in and carefully file it away using the naming conventions that Docstore does automatically. And then they would put the document in a box, in a banker's box, just drop it into a banker's box marked fiscal 2018 and never to be touched again. But if the CRA auditor showed up, then they would just be handed the big banker's box full of invoices and said, well, it's in here somewhere, if they felt that the electronic image was not sufficient. By the way, for those of you who have been part of the previous Adagio seminars, if you click on the Excel Direct button or you send document links out to Excel, they're preserved in Excel. So the spreadsheet that you send to someone can have links to the documents in the document system, so that they can look at the documents. So I'm 1 minute over. I'll just share your poll results, just because it's interesting to see the 20% of people who are comfortable with their accounting solution. This may be, don't have enough documents to warrant this, may already be part of their accounting solution. And I know that from long experience that people running accounting software are extraordinarily patient, waiting to see what their vendor offers in a particular space. So, but for those of you who are interested or who have seen stuff here that that kind of makes you interested, just drop us a note, and we'd be happy to show you this in a little bit more detail. So I think that's it for me, Marilyn. You're welcome to take back control.
Thank you, Andrew. Always enlightening. Nice to hear your voice. Alan, we need you to wrap us up. Are you there?
I'm here. So I want to thank Andrew, and I want to follow up on his closing statement. And again, I'm going to mention the survey. The most critical issue for people in 2018, according to the respondents, is workflow, and they are seriously taking a look at that. And speaking of the survey, if you were a respondent, you automatically got a copy of the 190-odd page book. If you would like a copy, then click on yes in the question that will be asked in the little survey that we do after this. So thank you again, and we're off to let people do taxes, right, Marilyn?
You sure are.
So have a good tax season. For the rest of you, have an enjoyable couple of weeks, and we'll see you again in May. It's a wrap.